Section 11 of Lives of the Queens of England, Volume 5, by Agnes and Elisabeth Strickland. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Mary, Chapter 1, Part 3. Henry VIII was very anxious to gain the sanction of the noble-minded Reginald to his pending divorce. When greatly urged to give his opinion on that head, and to accept of the Archbishopric of York, rendered vacant by the death of Wolsey, Reginald, by letter, firmly and respectfully declined this great advancement, adding many arguments against the divorce of Catharine, and the degradation of her daughter. Henry was incensed. He called the disinterested advocate before him in the stately gallery of Whitehall Palace, to account for this opposition. Reginald, who at that time loved the king ardently, could not speak for emotion, and his words, so celebrated for their impassioned eloquence, were stifled in a gush of tears. Yet his broken sentences proved that he was firm in his principles, and manly in his defence of the helpless queen and her daughter. Henry frowned, and his hand often sought the hilt of his dagger, but if his kinsman did not yield to affection or interest, there was little chance of a scion of the Plantagenets bending to fear. Henry left Reginald weeping, and vented his temper by threats to his brother, Lord Montague, threats which long after were fatally verified. Reginald's brothers loaded him with reproaches, yet he appears to have convinced them that he was right, for Montague, his elder brother, undertook a message of explanation to the king, who had rather taken the contents of the letter which had displeased him, from the report of the Duke of Norfolk, than from his own perusal. Meantime Henry had conquered his passion, for he was yet a novice in injustice and cruelty. He examined the letter, and after walking up and down thoughtfully for some time, turned to his kinsman, Lord Montague, and said, "Your brother Reginald has rightly guessed my disposition. He has given me such good reasons for his conduct, that I am under the necessity of taking all that he has said in good part. And, could he but gain on himself to approve my divorce from the queen, no one would be dearer to me." At this period no separation had taken place of the English Church from Rome, and the divorce cause remained wholly undecided. Therefore no religious prejudices were at issue in the bosom of Reginald Pole. It was as yet a simple matter of right or wrong, between a husband, wife, and child. And when his opinion was demanded, and not till then, Reginald, the near kinsman of the husband and child, honestly declared what he thought of the justice of the case. If his defence of the oppressed made a powerful impression on the oppressor, what must it have done on the minds of those whose cause he pleaded? The queen, from the commencement of her troubles, had often recurred to the unjust sentence on Reginald Pole's uncle, the last of the Plantagenets. She said, that she saw the judgment of God in her afflictions, for a marriage founded in murder was not likely to prosper. She knew that her father, King Ferdinand, had refused the English alliance, till Warwick was executed. The conscientious queen had endeavoured to make reparation by the friendship she ever showed to Warwick's sister, the Countess of Salisbury, and by the affection she cultivated between her daughter, Mary, and the children of the countess. At one period of her life, and this may naturally be deemed the time, Catharine was heard to express a wish that Mary might marry a son of Lady Salisbury, in order to atone for the wrong done to the Earl of Warwick, whose property was taken as well as his life. Reginald Pole used no surreptitious means to realize a wish so flattering to ambition. When the young princess was 16, he withdrew from England, finding that his principles could not accord with the measures of the king. Yet it was supposed that his reluctance to take priest's orders arose from a lingering hope that the wishes of Queen Catharine might one day be fulfilled. An utter silence is maintained, alike in public history and state documents, regarding that agonizing moment when the Princess Mary was reft from the arms of her unfortunate mother, to behold her no more. No witness has told the parting, no pen has described it, but sad and dolorous it certainly was to the hapless girl, even to the destruction of health. In the same month that Henry VIII and Queen Catharine finally parted, Mary had been ill, for a payment was made by her father to Dr. Bartlett of £20 in reward for giving her his attendance. Another long sickness afflicted the princess the succeeding March, when the king again gave a large sum to the physician for restoring his daughter. Mary's sorrow had thus cast an early blight on her constitution, which she never wholly recovered. But her troubles had not yet reached their climax, for Lady Salisbury, the friend, next her mother, dear to her heart, still resided with her. This fact is evident from the letter, written by Queen Catharine, in which the recent illness of Mary is mentioned, and at the conclusion a kind message is sent to Lady Salisbury. In this letter, Catharine endeavoured, with great sweetness, to reconcile the Princess Mary to the loss of the Latin lessons she used to give her, by commendations of the superior ability of her tutor, Dr. Featherstone, who, it is evident, still retained his post. At the same time, she requested occasionally to inspect her daughter's Latin exercises. The queen's letter concluded with expressions of tender regret at her separation from the king and her daughter, but without a word of angry complaint at the cause, which she wisely knew would irritate and agonize the mind of her child. Woburn is the place of date, which marks the time as during the queen's residence at the palace of Ampthill, close to that abbey. The succeeding year brought many trials to the unfortunate mother and daughter, who were still cruelly kept from the society of each other. The king proclaimed his marriage with Anne Boleyn. Cranmer pronounced the marriage of Queen Catharine invalid, and the coronation of the rival queen took place. Another letter, written by Catharine of Aragon to her daughter, occurs without date of time or place, which we conjecture to have been written at Bugden, 1533, about the middle of August. Daughter, I heard such tidings this day, that I do perceive, if it be true, the time is very near when Almighty God will provide for you, and I am very glad of it, for I trust he doth handle you with a good love. I beseech you agree to his pleasure with a merry or cheerful heart, and be you sure that without fail he will not suffer you to perish if you beware to offend him. I pray God that you, good daughter, offer yourself to him. If any pangs come over you, strive yourself. First make you clean, take heed of his commandments, and keep them as near as he will give you grace to do, for there are you sure armed. And if this lady do come to you as it is spoken, if she do bring you a letter from the king, I am sure in the selfsame letter you will be commanded what to do. Answer with very few words, obeying the king your father in everything, save only that you will not offend God and lose your soul, and go no further with learning and disputation in the matter. And wheresoever and in whatsoever company you shall come, obey the king's commandments, speak few words, and meddle nothing. I will send you 2 books in Latin. One shall be De Vita Christi, with the declarations of the Gospels, and the other the Epistles of St. Jerome, that he did write to Paula and Eustochium, and in them, I trust, you will see good things. Sometimes, for your recreation, use your virginals or lute, if you have any. But one thing specially I desire you, for the love you owe to God and unto me, to keep your heart with a chaste mind, and your person from all ill and wanton company, not thinking or desiring of any husband, for Christ's passion, neither determine yourself to any manner of living until this troublesome time is past. For I do make you sure you shall see a very good end, and better than you can desire. I would God, good daughter, that you did know with how good a heart I write this letter unto you. I never did one with a better, for I perceive very well that God loveth you. I beseech him of his goodness to continue it. I think it best you keep your keys yourself, for whosoever it is, that is, whosoever keeps her keys, shall be done as shall please them. And now you shall begin, and by likelihood I shall follow. I set not a rush by it, for when they have done the utmost they can, then I am sure of amendment. I pray you recommend me unto my good Lady of Salisbury, and pray her to have a good heart, for we never come to the kingdom of heaven but by troubles. Daughter, wheresoever you come, take no pain to send to me, for, if I may, I will send to you. By your loving mother, Catharine the Queen. Hitherto this letter has been deemed a mystery. It is evidently written with conflicting feelings, under the pressure of present calamity, but with the excitement of recently awakened hope of better days. The queen has privately heard of some great, but undeclared benefit to her daughter, which she hints at, to cheer her. Meantime she expects that a lady is to summon Mary by a letter from the king, and that she is shortly to be introduced into trying scenes, where the divorce will be discussed, and her opinion demanded. On these points, she disinterestedly and generously exhorts her not to controvert her father's will. The queen expects her daughter to be surrounded by dissipated company, where temptations will sedulously be brought to assail her, against which she guards her. She likewise anticipates the enemies will be near her, and warns her to keep the keys herself, dreading the surreptitious introduction of dangerous papers into her escritory. Lady Salisbury is still Mary's protectress, but that venerable lady is in trouble, and looking darkly forward to the future. The kind queen sends her a message of Christian consolation, the efficacy of which she had fully tried. All that has been considered mysterious in the letter of Queen Catharine vanishes before the fact preserved in the pages of the Italian Pollino, who declares that Mary was present at Greenwich Palace, and in the chamber of Anne Boleyn, when Elisabeth was born. Setting aside the religious prejudices of the historian, the simple fact that Mary was there is highly probable. Till some days subsequent to the birth of Elisabeth, Henry did not disinherit his eldest daughter, lest, if anything fatal had happened to Queen Anne and her infant, he might have been left without legitimate offspring of any kind. It is very likely that the laws of England required then, as now, that the presumptive heir of the kingdom should be present at the expected birth of an heir apparent to the crown. If Catherine of Aragon's letter be read with this light cast on it, how plain does it appear! The good mother endeavoured to fortify her daughter's mind for the difficult situation in which she would have found herself in the chamber of Anne Boleyn, at the birth of the rival heir. Then the beneficial change in Mary's prospects, hinted at by her mother, has reference to the recent decree of the Pope, soon after made public, who, in July 1533, had annulled the marriage of Henry VIII with Anne Boleyn, and forbade them to live together under pain of excommunication, a sentence which likewise illegitimated their offspring, and confirmed Mary in her royal station. This sentence was published in September, as near as possible to the birth of Elisabeth, and secret intelligence of this measure had evidently been given to Catherine of Aragon, when she wrote to Mary. She knew that the decision of Rome had previously settled all such controversies, and it was natural enough that she should expect the same result would take place. It is very clearly to be gathered from the continued narrative of our Italian authority that Mary did not adhere to the temperate line of conduct her wise mother had prescribed for her. She was present, says Pollino, assisting, with the relatives and friends of Anne Boleyn, in the lying-in chamber, when Lisabetta, or Elisabeth, was born, and there she heard, among the ladies and persons of the court, such secret things, relative to the conduct of the mother, as made her declare that she was sure the infant was not her sister. Thus had Mary, with the natural incautiousness of youth, given ear to all the scandal which Queen Anne's enemies were whispering on this occasion, and Mary's informants, who were probably her deadliest foes, had repeated to Anne Boleyn and the king any imprudence she, in the excitement of the moment, might utter, or even what she did not utter, but was attributed to her by the surrounding gossips. Too often there is an evil propensity in the human heart, which finds amusement in the fomentation of dissension where family interests clash. The close observer may see this tendency in active operation among gossiping circles, even where the promoters of strife have not the least selfish end to gain by success in their endeavours. If they would subject themselves to that rigid self-examination which moral justice requires, they would find their satisfaction arose from a certain degree of malignant marvellousness, which is gratified in watching the agitation of their victims. In short, they witness a species of improvisator tragedy, of which they furnish the plot and machinery. If, according to the wise scripture proverb, a little matter kindleth a great heap, when the tale-bearers of private life are pursuing their self-appointed vocation, let us consider what the case was in the royal family of England, September 1533, when the matter was so portentous, and the heap so enormous. The situation of Mary, when called to court at such a crisis, must have been trying in the extreme, nor could the most sedulous caution have guided her through the difficulties which beset her path, without incurring blame from one party or the other. There is, however, whatever the court gossips might say, the witness of her own letter, that she never denied the name of sister to the new-born infant, for when she was required to give up the title of princess, and call Elisabeth by no other appellation, sister, she said, she would call the babe, but nothing more. Her father threatened her. His threats were useless, and he proceeded to aggravate the case by declaring Mary's new-born rival his heiress, in default of male issue, a dignity till then enjoyed by Mary, who had lately, as such, exercised authority in the Principality of Wales. But neither threats nor deprivations had the least effect in bending the resolution of Mary. That her resistance did not spring from an exclusive devotion of her own interest, her subsequent concession proved, but her love for her injured mother was an absorbing feeling, paramount to every other consideration, and while Catharine of Aragon lived, Mary of England would have suffered martyrdom rather than make a concession against the interest and dignity of that adored parent. Before the end of September, the Privy Council sent orders to Mary, who had then returned to Boulogne, that she was immediately to lay aside the name and dignity of princess, and moreover enjoined her to forbid her servants to address her as such, and to withdraw directly to Hatfield, where the nursery of her infant sister was about to be established. The king did not take any ostensible part in this message. Conduct, however singular it may appear, was perfectly consistent with the excessive love of approbation apparent in his character, even when he was performing acts of the utmost enormity. The important message, whose effect was to deprive the eldest child of the English crown of her exalted situation, was delivered by her chamberlain, Hussey. It purported to be the king's commandment delivered to him by the Privy Council on the last Sunday at Greenwich. When it is remembered that the princess was but 17 at this crisis, the tact and courage of her reply will excite some surprise. She told Hussey that she not a little marvelled at his undertaking in his single person, unauthorized by commission of council, signed by the king, or by his majesty's private letters to her, such matter of high emprise, as minishing her from her state and dignity, she not doubting withal that she was the king's true daughter, born in good and lawful matrimony, and unless she were advertised by letter, from the king's own hand, that his grace was so minded to diminish her state, name, and dignity, which she trusted he would never do, she should never believe the same. Hussey withdrew, to indite a narrative of the scene to his employers of the Privy Council. It is well worthy of remark that in this dispatch he invariably applied the titles of Grace and Princess to Mary, though addressing the very persons who had just employed him to deprive her of those distinctions. In Mary's letter to the Privy Council, she sustained the high tone of a royal lady, whose rights of succession were invaded illegally. My lords, as touching my removal to Hatfield, I will obey his grace, as my duty is, or to any other place his grace may appoint me, but I protest before you and all others present, that my conscience will in no wise suffer me to take any other than myself for princess, or for the king's daughter born in lawful matrimony, and that I will never wittingly or willingly say, or do, aught whereby any person might take occasion to think that I agree to the contrary. Nor say I this out of any ambition or proud mind, as God is my judge. If I should do otherwise, I should slander the deed of our mother, the Holy Church, and the Pope, who is the judge in this matter, and none other, and should also dishonor the king my father, the queen my mother, and falsely confess myself a bastard, which God defend I should do, since the Pope hath not so declared it by his sentence definitive, to whose final judgment I submit myself." Hussey's dispatch to the council produced a letter, purported to be the royal order, written by the comptroller of the king's household, requiring Mary to leave Beaulieu, and take up her abode at Hertford Castle. From a subsequent order in council, it appears that the king and his ministers were dubious whether the princely establishment, formed for the infant Elizabeth, was to be fixed at Hatfield or Hertford Castle. Wherever it were to be, it is evident that no home was to be allowed the fallen Mary, but the spot where she was to draw daily comparisons between her lost dignities and those profusely lavished on the daughter of the rival queen. In this exigence, Mary wrote thus to her father: The Lady Mary to the King. In most humble wise I beseech your grace your daily blessing. Pleaseth the same to be advertised, that this morning my chamberlain came and showed me that he had received a letter from Sir William Paulet, comptroller of your household. The effect whereof was, that I should, with all diligence, remove to the castle of Hertford. Whereupon I desire to see that letter, which he showed me, wherein was written that the Lady Mary, the king's daughter, should remove to the place aforesaid, leaving out in the same the name of princess. Which, when I heard, I could not a little marvel, trusting, verily, that your grace was not privy to the same letter, as concerning the leaving out of the name of princess. Forasmuch as I doubt not that your grace doth take me for your lawful daughter, born in true matrimony. Wherefore, if I were to say to the contrary, I should in my conscience run into the displeasure of God, which I hope assuredly that your grace would not that I should do. And in all other things your grace shall have me always, as humble and obedient daughter and handmaid as ever was child to the Father, which my duty bindeth me to, as knoweth our Lord, who have your grace in his most holy tuition, with much honour and long life to his pleasure. From your manor of Beaulieu, October 2nd. By your most humble daughter, Mary, Princess. The king took decided measures to dissolve the household of his daughter at Beaulieu by sending the Duke of Norfolk, assisted by Lord Marnley, the Earl of Oxford, and his almoner, Bishop Fox, to deal with her, while the Duke of Suffolk and others of the council were breaking up her mother's establishment at Bungay. In the midst of these troubles, Mary's cousin german, James V, solicited her hand, but his suit was refused peremptorily, lest such marriage should interfere with the title of Anne Boleyn's issue. The degradation of the Princess Mary was rendered legal in the beginning of 1534, when the Houses of Parliament passed an act, settling the crown on the king's heir by Queen Anne, whether male or female. Mary's household at Beaulieu, a princely establishment, consisting of no less than 160 individuals, was finally dismissed and dispersed, and the unfortunate princess was severed from those to whose society she had been accustomed during her childhood. Above all, she was torn from her venerable relative, Margaret, Countess of Salisbury, in whose arms she had been encircled in the first days of her existence. This was a blow more bitter than the mere deprivation of rank or titles. Harder than all, when separated from this maternal friend, she was transferred to the nursery palace of Hunsdon, where the infant Elizabeth was established, with a magnificent household, befitting the rank of which Mary had just been deprived. In this residence Mary was located, more like a bond maiden than the sister of the acknowledged heiress of the realm. Hunsdon had formerly belonged to the family of the Boleyns. It had been recently purchased or exchanged by the king. To this place, the former seat of her family, had Anne Boleyn sent her infant, with royal pomp, nor was she satisfied unless the fallen princess drew hourly comparisons between her lot and that of the sister, who had supplanted her. A fearful thing was thus to tempt the heart of a fellow creature by aggravating grief into passionate anger through the infliction of gratuitous injury. But the heart of Mary was as yet unscathed by the corrosion of hatred. Every object of her strong affections was not then destroyed, though they were removed, and ample proof remains that instead of being aggravated into detesting or injuring her rival sister, she amused her sorrows with the playful wiles of the infant, and regarded her with kindness. This result probably originated in the fact that Queen Anne Boleyn, choosing that, as far as she could command, the former attendants of Mary should wait on Elizabeth, had appointed Lady Margaret Bryan as her governess. Whatever others might do, it is certain that excellent lady did all in her power to soothe the wounded mind of her former charge, and promote her kindly feelings to her infant sister. The insults heaped by Anne Boleyn at this crisis on the unfortunate Mary weighed heavily on her conscience when she was making up her accounts with eternity. What they were rests between God and herself, for no specific detail of them exists. Perhaps the severe inquiry, made the summer after Mary's removal from Boulogne, relative to her correspondence and communication with her friends, was among these repented malefactions. In a mutilated letter from Fitzwilliam, treasurer of the king's household, to Cromwell, is an account of a search made in the coffers of Mary at Hunsdon, which were sealed up. Various papers were seized, put into a bag, and sent to Cromwell, together with a purse of purple velvet, containing some writings, perhaps the very letter from her mother quoted above. Several persons were, at the same time, committed to the Tower, on the charge of holding private intercourse with the Lady Mary, and styling her princess, after the prohibition issued against it. Among these was Lady Hussey, and her examination, taken August 3rd, is still preserved. Various ensnaring interrogations were put to Lady Hussey, as how often had she repaired to the Lady Mary, since she had lost the name of princess? Whether she was sent for, and on what occasion she went? Whether she knew that the Lady Mary was justly declared by law to be no princess, and yet had so called her? What moved her so to do? Whether she had received any tokens or messages from the Lady Mary, and what persons, at that time, visited her at Hunsdon? The replies are short and unequivocal, the language of one who felt she had done nothing wrong, yet sensible of the danger incurred. She stated, she had visited the Lady Mary only once, since the king had discharged her from Boulogne, and that was when Lord Hussey came up to Parliament, and the last Whitsuntide, and the visit then was, altogether, accidental. She owned, she had inadvertently called the Lady Mary twice by the name of princess, not from any wish to disobey the law, but simply from her having been so long accustomed to it. She confessed having received a trifling present from the Lady Mary. Among the persons who visited the disinherited princess at Hunsdon, she deposed, was Lord Morley. He was the literary friend, whose testimony to Mary's early attainments has been already quoted, and who, to the honour of literature, did not forsake the unfortunate, notwithstanding his daughter's intermarriage in the Boleyn family. Lady Morley, Mr. Shakerley and his wife, and Sir Edward Baynton, were likewise among Mary's visitors. The poor princess, says Heylin, had at Hunsdon no comfort but in her books. She was assisted in her studies by Dr. Voysey, whom Henry VIII rewarded, for the pains he took, with the bishopric of Exeter. This passage leads to the supposition that Dr. Featherstone, who had been employed in Mary's education since her infancy, had been dismissed, with the rest of the attached friends who composed her household, at her regretted home of Boulogne. The 2 melancholy years which Mary spent at Hunsdon, under the surveillance of her stepmother, were passed in sorrow and suffering. The few friends who dared visit her, were subjected to the severest espionage. Their words were malignantly scrutinized, and sedulously reported to the Privy Council. The papers of the princess were put under the royal seal, and, if she were allowed to read, she certainly was not permitted to write, since, in one of her letters, penned just after the execution of Anne Boleyn, she apologizes for her evil writing because she had not written a letter for 2 years. Her father muttered murderous threats against her, and his words were eagerly caught and re-echoed by those members of his council, whose whole study it was to flatter his wilful wishes, however wicked they might be. If the expressions of King Henry had not been appalling to the last degree, would the treasurer, Fitzwilliam, have dared to use the revolting terms he did, regarding his master's once idolized daughter? If she will not be obedient to his grace, I would, quoth he, that her head was from her shoulders, that I might toss it here with my foot. and so put his foot forward, spurning the rushes, a graphic exemplification, added by two witnesses of his horrible speech, which it seems was not resented, but received as a dutiful compliment by the father of the young female, whose head was thus kicked as a football, in the lively imagination of the obedient satellite. Dark indeed were the anticipations throughout Europe regarding the future destiny, not only of the unfortunate daughter, but of the queen her mother, during the year 1535. The king's envoys wrote home that all men viewed them, as Englishmen, with either pity or horror. Mason, who was resident in Spain, declared that the people expected to hear every day of the execution of Queen Catharine, and that the Princess Mary was expected soon to follow her. These rumours were vaguely stated in general history. Only one author, and he a foreigner, attempts to relate the particular circumstances which instigated Henry VIII to meditate the astounding crime of filiacide. Gregorio Leti affirms that some fortune teller had predicted the accession of the Princess Mary to the crown after the death of her father. This report, being circulated at court, was quickly brought to Queen Anne Boleyn, and threw her into great agitation. She flew to the king, and with tears and sobs told him how much afflicted she was at the thought that their child should be excluded from the throne for the sake of Mary, who was the offspring of a marriage so solemnly pronounced illegal. Henry, who was completely bewitched by her, embraced her with all the tenderness possible, and to assuage her tears, promised not only to disinherit Mary, but even to kill her, rather than such a result should happen. Fox, and every succeeding historian, declared that Cranmer prevented the king from immolating his daughter. If so, this must have been the crisis. To the princess, the matter of her life or death was, perhaps, of little moment, for grief had laid her on a bed of dolorous sickness. Her mother was on her deathbed, desiring with a yearning heart, but with words of saintly meekness, to be permitted, if not to see her, merely to breathe the same air with her afflicted daughter. She promises solemnly that if Mary may be resident near her, she will not attempt to see her, if forbidden. She adds that such measure was impossible, since she lacked provisions therefor, meaning she had neither horse nor carriage to go out. Yet she begs the king may be always told that the thing she most desires is the company of her daughter, for a little comfort and mirth she would take with me should undoubtedly be half health unto her. Doleful would have been the mirth, and heartrending the comfort, had such interview been permitted, between the sick daughter and the dying mother, but it was no item in the list of Henry's tender mercies. The Emperor Charles V remonstrated sternly on the treatment of his aunt and young kinswoman, and the whole ingenuity of the Privy Council was exerted to hammer out a justification of the ugly case. A copy of the dispatch sent to Mason, much altered and interlined, remains in Cromwell's hand. Touching the bruit of the misentreaty of the queen and princess, such report and bruit is untrue. Then, after setting forth King Henry's munificence to the mother, he by no means boasts of his generosity to the princess, but adds, "Our daughter, the Lady Mary, we do order and entertain as we think expedient, for we think it not meet that any person should prescribe unto us how we should order our own daughter, we being her natural father." In another dispatch, the rumour at the imperial court is indignantly denied, that it was the king's intention to marry Mary to some person of base blood. The death of Mary's tender and devoted mother opened the year 1536 with a dismal aggravation of her bitter lot. The sad satisfaction of a last adieu between the dying queen and her only child was cruelly forbidden. Mary was informed of the tidings of her mother's expected dissolution, and with agonizing tears and plaints, implored permission to receive her last blessing. Yet in vain, for Catherine of Aragon expired without seeing her daughter. Again the continent rung with reprobation of such proceedings. The English resident at Venice wrote to Thomas Strickland, a learned divine at Henry's court, February 5, 1536, that Queen Catharine's death had been divulged there, and was received with lamentations, for she was incredibly dear to all men for her good fame, which is in great glory among all exterior nations." He concludes in Latin: "Great obloquy has her death occasioned. All dread lest the royal girl should briefly follow her mother. I assure you, men speaketh here tragice of these matters, which are not to be touched by letters. Happy would it have been for Mary, happy for her country, if her troublous pilgrimage had closed, even thus tragically, before she had been made the ostensible instrument of wrong and cruelty unutterable to conscientious Protestants." Section 12.